Now, so we're going to have our second speaker, Venerable Ayya Soma, today, and who is going to talk about a very interesting topic called becoming a cyberspace Bodhisattva. And I think we talk so much about chat GPT and artificial intelligence in the fast-paced technology. How do we navigate our world at this day and age? So Venerable Ayya Soma is going to cover this topic. Over to you, Venerable Soma. I'm going to put your bio in the chats for everybody to see later. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Sinsin, and thank you, Tina, for inviting me today and for organizing this beautiful conference. It's actually quite nerve-wracking to go after Venerable Robina Korten. That was a little unkind of you all to schedule me after Robina Korten. Nobody can match the Venerable afterwards. So, oh well. But yeah, before we begin this session, I would like to start by paying homage to our original teacher, Shakyamuni Buddha, the reason why we're gathered here today. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham dhammam sangham namasami. All right. Well, it's good to see so many people. I believe it's morning in Sydney, in Australia. Here in America, I'm in New Jersey. It's 6 p.m. and it's actually the day before 2 ordinations here at Empty Cloud Monastery. And I'm also leaving on Monday for 3 months. And we've had just a day-long retreat. And I don't know how many programs and plans this past week. And so it's actually quite interesting because when Sinsin pitched this sort of topic, he also mentioned how essentially we can, in our sort of Dharma practice, sometimes we can feel really overwhelmed and burn out. And he was, kind of encouraging me to share a few words also on how to sort of prevent that from happening. And it's actually happening right now. So I'm not quite sure I'm the right speaker. But, these situations, actually, I would say, it's very, very interesting because in our Dharma practice, we really can have so many big aspirations and we can train all the time, hopefully. But sometimes, there can be all of these things that pile up and we can feel very overwhelmed and once again, burn out. And then kind of start having those negative thoughts that actually also Venerable Robina Korten was talking about earlier, where we start sort of self-bashing and going like, I don't know, I'm not really a good practitioner, and I should know better than that, and start having self-doubt and also doubt also in the path. Is this path actually really working? What is happening in my mind, in my heart? How can we handle all of these things and juggle all these things? But it's actually very important to remember the teachings of the Buddha, also of Chittanupassana. So, when we have also the contemplation of the mind, when we have a deluded mind, for example, or a confused mind, this is a great opportunity to actually look at the mind and really understand, what does a confused mind look like? What does a deluded mind look like? What is all this agitation, all of these different kind of emotions and self-hatred? What are all these things? How do they manifest? What sort of color, what kind of shape do they have? What kind of texture? And learn from that and see and look, welcome them in actually, rather than sort of pushing them out as we tend to do. So these are great opportunities. I was kind of glad that all of these things piled up, and And here I am, with a bit of an exhausted mind, having to talk a little bit about this topic, and also, how to conciliate, this sort of aspiration that we have to benefit, to be of benefit to ourselves and others. And I feel like, to a certain degree, whether we're monastics or lay people, whether we're practicing in the Theravada tradition or in the Mahayana tradition or in the Vajrayana tradition, we always have to remember that whatever we do has to be, any kind of Dhamma practice has to be for our benefit and the benefit of others. There is not much difference, and the two somewhat kind of support each other. But at the same time, we also have to understand that there can not be one without the other. So I hope that you forgive my English tonight, because I can't speak that well English right now. And I can't give this talk in Italian, so I apologize ahead of time if some things are quite unclear. But what comes to mind also is that, the Buddha encourages us also to reflect on, there are four kinds of people, essentially. The person who practices for their own benefit, the person who practices for the benefit of others, and the person who practices for the benefit and the benefit of others, and the person who practices for neither benefit of themselves and of others. And he actually, it's very interesting, that sutta, because he actually kind of creates a sort of graduatory where he says, obviously the foremost is the person who practices for their benefit and the benefit of others. And obviously the least, the sort of impressive practitioner is the one who practices neither for their benefit and the benefit of others. But actually between the two, the ones who, either practice for their own benefit or the one who practices for the benefit of others, he says that the superior practitioner is actually the one who practices for their own benefit. It's actually quite surprising. It was very surprising for me, coming from a Catholic country, Italy, where there's, every kind of church you walk into, there's lots of martyrs who pretty much have dedicated their entire life to sacrificing their lives for others. And so that is very much treasured. It's somewhat put as the apex of what we should always aspire. And so when I read that sutta, when I encountered that sutta, those teachings of the Buddha, I was quite shocked. And I was like, I thought that, that was, if I had to pick between myself and others, I should pick first others before myself. And instead, we see that the Buddha instead encourages us to actually have a bit of a different way of looking at things, and kind of realizing that whenever we are too much, too crushed, too incapable of really holding our pieces together, where we're not of benefit to ourselves, how can we even be of benefit of others? But rather, if we start from ourselves and we cultivate that kind of inner strength, that very strong mind, a very strong heart, and we look back at trying to cultivate a solid practice, then we're capable of not only helping ourselves, but then also helping others. And we get back, of course, to the sort of simile that is often used, of someone who's drowning. We see someone who's drowning. Well, if we don't know how to swim, then how can we actually help them from...
Okay, so we're just going to breathe through this while we wait for Ayya Soma to reconnect. Speaking of cyberspace bodhisattvas.
To get out of there. And so we want to prevent, right? We would like to, that's not the objective. It's not, may all beings drown, but may all beings be free from suffering. And so we need to learn how to first, of course, learn how to swim. But it's also important, actually, Master Cheng Yen, one of the masters of the Taiwanese Chan traditions, also encourages us to remember that, in order to learn how to swim, we still need to get inside into the water. So that's where we, kind of can keep this simile into our mind, where we can understand how it's very important to take time for ourselves, not feel selfish whenever we are taking time for, just to learn, study the teachings of the Buddha, do meditation practice, cultivate the mind, not feel kind of like, oh, I could be doing something else, even forget about the society at large, but even if perhaps our family or our dear ones are, not faring too well, maybe both physically and mentally, sometimes we can think that it's a kind of selfish act if we go and do some Dharma practice, right? That we're taking time off of some other chores that could be, more useful. We can be very utilitarian about things, but instead actually take a step back and go like, actually, this is very useful. This is very beneficial. And this actually makes me strong, strengthens my mind, strengthens my heart. And I can then be capable of then getting into the water and starting to learn how to swim. And then, once we get comfortable in the water, we can, take a few, how do you say in English, strokes, maybe. Like start feeling the water, starting to get a little bit more adventurous, so to speak, in the water. And then ultimately at the end, we can also like really try and see if we can save others while we're saving ourselves. And so it's important that, all of this, I feel like we should somewhat remember. And of course, sometimes we'll get very excited because maybe we have a natural sort of way of being in the water and feeling comfortable maybe at the very beginning. And we're like, actually, the water is even a little shallow. So maybe let me go a little bit further. Right. And then, boom, all of a sudden, actually, we've taken on a little bit too much. And that's where we drown. And that's where we might feel, that burnout and that feeling of being overwhelmed. And it's okay. That's once again, the time to actually look, observe the mind, learn from this experience as well, learn from our delusion, learn from our confusion, learn from all of these sort of negative mind states. And be okay and be okay, all right, forgiving ourselves, going, all right, Ven Ayya Soma, it's all right, it's just part of the practice. And we can learn how to be gentle with ourselves, which then is actually a practice of compassion in and of itself, that then we can also transfer to others when we see others who are somewhat, maybe either going through the same kind of way of same experience, or maybe another experience altogether, but maybe making what we perceive as mistakes, being a little less inflexible and more understanding. One of my favorite translations of, actually my favorite Pali words that's usually translated as compassion, anukampa, literally means trembling together. And I find this so beautiful because it just kind of gives us a really good understanding of what compassion really is. And it's that understanding that each one of us is basically having this same experience of dukkha, something that is really difficult to bear. And it manifests in different ways. And sometimes we can very much focus on the outer appearance of the dukkha and go like, well, my dukkha is different from your dukkha. And my dukkha is much bigger than your dukkha, or much lower than your dukkha, or whatever it is. And we can kind of play this comparison game. But in reality, actually, the dukkha is always the dukkha. That's why the teachings of the Buddha are applicable to each one of us. And it's difficult to bear. It doesn't matter what the content is. It's just something that is difficult to bear. And so in that, we're all like trembling together, trying to hold this like big mass of suffering, right? And kind of like, on this, raft on the water. And it's difficult. But then we start seeing how we're all kind of trying to do our best while holding this big mass of suffering. And And we start trembling together, and it's the beautiful, beautiful opening of the heart where we start realizing, oh, this is actually the human experience, and this is what the Buddha is talking about, and this is the cause of this dukkha. And then we can go like, but there's also a cessation of this dukkha. It doesn't have to be like this all the time. How do I release this dukkha and recollect the teachings of the Buddha? As Venerable Rabina Kortin was saying, it's very useful to learn the teachings so then we can recollect them. The beauty of mindfulness is not only that, we're just present in the moment, right here, right now, but it's that we're present in the moment, we recollect the teachings that are useful to apply in that moment. And that also, in every moment, we are capable of understanding how greed, hatred, and delusion appear in the mind. How are they formed? How do they come into being? And how actually are they also coming into cessation? What are the causes and conditions that create this result? And what are the sort of causes and conditions that once they cease, then this other result ceases? And this way we can start learning from our experience. And and living in community, I have to say, as a monastic, is just so humbling. so humbling, because it's usually in monasteries, we have kind of like the 1% of people in the world, the good 1%, and the other 1% that we normally read in the news. That is, trying to cultivate as much as possible greed, hatred, and delusion. But actually, the other 1%, the one is trying to really actively remove greed, hatred, and delusion. So it's just really beautiful, right? We're like, oh, if we remember the first times we started going to Buddhist monasteries, I definitely remember I was like, oh, wow, this is just so lovely. Everybody's so great and incredible. I really love, going to Buddhist monasteries. I love it so much that I actually just want to be a monk, and I'll shave my head and I'll put the robe on. Oh, it's so lovely being in a monastery. And then after a while, we start seeing that actually, this person is nice, but they could be nicer. And this person has compassion, but they actually could be more compassionate. Or that person, we start seeing actually that people are not perfect. And then there's so many sort of irritations that come into our minds as well. And we start going like, I don't know. Well, that phrase was not really well spoken, and that thing could have been, better acted upon. And we start having all these kind of lists of how things could be better, and perhaps encyclopedias, depending whether one is an aversive type or not. And it's just so interesting, because then we can have actually some really sort of dramatic situations happening in monasteries on nuisances, like on really like trivial things. And what is really humbling about this is that then we start having a perspective of like, wow, if we are capable, of arguing or having fights, or really not wanting to see people over, over the fact that a spoon has been misplaced, or or something like, or maybe that we're 10 minutes late for something on the schedule. Why are we surprised that, there's war? Why are we surprised that there is all sorts of crimes? Why are we surprised that there are all sorts of discriminations in the world, when people don't even have the aspiration to remove greed, hatred, and delusion from their minds? We start seeing this kind of like different perspective. Also because we see how many incomprehensions there can happen in monasteries, right? That person has this kind of view of how things happen, how they worked out, and we have our own view, and this other person has this other view, right? So it's just really incredible. And we all speak English, at Empty Cloud Monastery, we all speak English. I'm the one who speaks it most poorly, but I kind of like understand mostly what other people are saying. And it's just really interesting that even though we have the same sort of aspiration, same language, there can still be all of this mess. And so we realize that human relationships are really, really messy. So when it comes to actually doing things, it's not that a lot of times there's kind of this equation that when we understand the nature of samsara, that this is kind of somewhat natural, somewhat normal, and that the opposite is what it's not normal. So the fact that peace, for example, actually this also long period of peace that we've had is actually quite abnormal. In particular parts of the world, we've had somewhat the absence of war for periods of time, right? It's been for quite a long time. In other parts of the world, not the case. Actually, there has been lots of war, but to have even parts of the world where peace has been happening for quite a long time is actually quite unusual. And it's just really bizarre how we are, shocked by the normal. And similarly in community, right? But that doesn't mean that once we understand the nature of samsara and this sort of unfixability of samsara, that then the response has to be idleness. The response has to be actually to try to do something about it, but try to do something about it without attachment. So Venerable Rinpoche gave a really long talk about, about precisely that, the attachment. So I'm not going to talk more about that because there's no way that one can say it better than Venerable Rinpoche. But yeah, very important to understand, why do we do the things that we do? Why are we acting all the time? Are we actually acting because we think that is something wholesome, because that something is worth doing? Or are we only acting because we want to actually achieve a specific objective? So either, we work and all sort of war, for example, ends, or all sorts of discrimination ends, or we don't do anything at all, right? We're like, okay, it's just this sort of binary. Like either we fix, there's no sexism anymore, or I just don't do anything. I just accept the whole sexism altogether. But how about we just actually try our best to make, even our backyard or our home like a better place? How about then we extend it? If we're successful with our home and our backyard, why don't we then try to act in our neighborhood? And it doesn't matter whether we're successful or not. And if it's the whole neighborhood that goes like, yes, Ayya Soma, you're right. Yes, we should be practicing this. But rather, it's like, yeah, because this is something good. It's something worthwhile. It's the same actually of the teachings of giving that the Buddha gives. He says there's this sutta where he talks about all these different types of reasons why people make offerings, for example, to the Sangha. And he says, well, there's perhaps one might give because, it's a family tradition. And so they will give to the Sangha. Or maybe some people will give because it just feels good to give. And so they'll make an offering. And then there are some people that might give because they go like, oh, these monastics, they don't cook, they don't have food. So, there's a need. So let me give them some food. Lots of different reasons. And he's like, actually, all these reasons are all pretty good. Actually, they go to a good destination. But you know what actually is the best, the foremost way, the foremost reason to give? It's because one understands that giving is an ornament of mind. No different than how we beautify ourselves. We put makeup on, we do our hair, and we come out and we're like, oh yeah, I really feel good about myself. I feel very pretty. It's the same way, like actually one gives because they feel like it's a beautiful ornament of mind. So in the same way, we can actually be compassionate, understanding that it doesn't matter whether or not we get what we want, so to speak. We accomplish the sort of aim of our compassion, but rather we are compassionate. We do acts of good deed because it's something beautiful. It's an ornament of mind. It's something that really beautifies ourselves, beautifies the world that we live in, inspires others. And we do it because that's what brings us also to awakening the cessation of suffering. And so when it comes to, I think also the topic was, in this constant digitalization of the world, the cyber Bodhisattva, all of these things. We're currently online. So there's it's kind of part of what makes everything even more overwhelming, I feel, these days. We have even more access to all the heartbreaking news in the world. So even I think sometimes it can be sometimes more of an obstacle actually to our compassion than an asset, because maybe we are capable of, affecting some beautiful change, maybe in our family or in our backyard. Or like, okay, well, great, at least 4 people that are on the same page. That's wonderful, that's beautiful. And then you open up any kind of sort of news, and it's just a disaster everywhere, and there's more and more problems, and so there's this huge, humongous dukkha that can actually feel very crashing. And I don't know, I'm a big fan actually of this app called Self-Control. I like to say, when you have no self-control, then you can download Self-Control, which is a free app that actually can block websites from actually just working on your computer. It turns your computer into actually like a 1980s machine for long periods of time. And so you can actually dedicate yourself to just particular activities. There's actually also lots of kids here in New York and also here that come at the monastery that actually are part of kind of this new trend of being a Luddite. So Generation Z is very fascinating, because they're born all with like all these like social media and big, very well connected. And now there's lots of like these cool kids that are just tossing all this technology away altogether. And the most technological have flip phones, like in the 90s. It's quite great, or the early 2000s. And they're relearning how to be actually more healthy, more in tune with their hearts and minds, and at the same time a lot more helpful when it comes to also helping themselves and others. Actually, one of these Luddites is our friend Ethan, who is taking Samanera ordination tomorrow at Empty Cloud. He's 19. And with his little flip phone that tomorrow he's going to let go of. And it's just really beautiful to see how we can also learn from people who are much younger than us on how maybe, do we actually have to engage with all this vastness, or can we actually slow down a little bit, and slow down also in terms of our attachments to the results that all our actions seem to be aiming at, rather than and kind of instead cultivate the action just because it's a really good thing to do. So anyway, so these are just a few thoughts that came up after this really, really long day at Empty Cloud. So if you have any questions, I'll try my best to answer them.
Thank you, Venerable Ayya Soma. I really appreciate that. We have got a few questions and also some comments as well. So let's start. I'll start first perhaps with the comment. So the comment is, this person has found a new word I really liked through another Dhamma friend, and the word is sonda. The profound feeling of realizing that everyone, including strangers passing in the street, has a life as complex as one's own, which are constantly living despite one's personal lack of awareness of it, which is very beautiful. Okay. Now, we do have some questions. The first question I think is a really good question, which is, what are some concrete things we can do to help the multitude of suffering beings around the world?
Well, I would say that, thank you for your question, first and foremost. I would say that, once again, the first thing is actually to work on yourself, to lead by example. that is the most inspiring thing that any one of us can actually do, is to become a better person. So none of us, for example, has, I think, entered this path because we met some really unimpressive people in Buddhism, and then we're like, all right, I want to be like that really unimpressive practitioner. Right? Usually we're motivated because we've met an impressive bhikkhu or impressive bhikkhuni or an impressive layperson that practices Buddhism, layman, laywoman. Actually, Tina, very impressive practitioner, also Sinsin, very impressive practitioners. Yeah, when I went to Australia, actually, I was amazed, still to this day, by that beautiful way of actually concretely blending the teachings of the Buddha with lay life. Actually, I think, Tina, I'll put you in the spot, but I feel like you should actually be answering this question. Being a lawyer, it's just so incredible. Usually, you put on Google lawyer, there's all the kind of the nastiest sort of jokes and just sort of the opposite of anything that is ethical. And it's just so marvelous how Tina has managed to turn a profession like the profession of law to actually support Buddhist ethics. And so that is something, basically her entire life is dedicated for the benefit of herself and others. So I feel like that is something that inspires others. This is role models. So starting with ourselves, what can we do in our life what can we shift? What can we alter that is actually that will benefit ourselves and others? And then in that way, we're actually transforming the world. It's actually quite impressive. People sometimes here at Empty Cloud say they are very happy that this place exists, and that they're impressed that people practice the way they do here, etc., etc. And sometimes I reflect on that, and well, what motivated me to do that? Well, it was also because I co-founded this place, right? And it was the same kind of aspiration that Tina had, just to create something that, shift my experience of the world, create a place that is beneficial for my own practice and for the practice of others. And then it's great that there are other people that want to come. But if we only kind of think, okay, everybody else should be doing it. So it has to be a place where I want to go and everybody else should change. Then I think it's a little bit unrealistic in the way that everybody else has also that kind of sort of aspiration. So nobody actually does anything. But we can look at our own experience and go, okay, what can I fix? What can I do? And learn from our mistakes, because we will be doing mistakes, So at Empty Cloud, it's far from perfect. And so you can always complain with Ayya Soma for everything that is wrong, but the good aspiration, I guess, is there. So that's even when I make mistakes, I'm like, okay, well, it's a mistake, but there's a good aspiration, so I'll see if I can do something better next time.
Very good, thank you, Ayya. Now we do have another comment. So earlier, Ayya, this was probably at the beginning of your talk, this comment came, which was that they wanted to share about a particular sutta, which is the Saddaka Sutta. And this is a sutta, as you will know, which is about looking after one's practice and protecting. When we look after our own practice, then we also protect other people's practice. So the Buddha used the simile that it's very similar to that of an acrobat. So by looking after one's balance and mindfulness, this person then protects others and himself. So that was a comment. If there's anything you wish to add to that.
Yes. Yeah, no, that's beautiful. The simile of the acrobat is just brilliant. So I don't think I can add more to that. That's the words of the Buddha. So it's difficult to somewhat to do anything better than the Buddha, really.
Thank you. And then there's another comment as well. I think earlier when you were talking about in the monastery and in the way that we live our life, it's very easy to have that critical mind to look for something that is perfection. So this person's comment is, thanks for sharing your journey of the noble search, the spiritual ideal, monastery, friends, etc., and how sometimes they don't match reality. And this person has found that perfection doesn't exist, and in giving up the ideal of perfection, all the shortcomings are no longer an issue anymore. It's just as it is. So thank you to the person for their contribution.
Much. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I will say I took that in my heart. That's for example, tonight's talk is, or this morning, since you're in Australia, this morning's talk is far from perfect, and it's kind of like a disaster, and it's okay. When you allow yourself to be an okay disaster, it's already like 75% of dukkha that kind of falls away. But we have so many sort of expectations for ourselves, so many expectations for others. And when we kind of like work on throwing away those expectations and going, okay, well, it's all right to suck. It's all right not to be perfect. I think, yeah, it's okay. We can live a little bit with a little less suffering already, and not be always, our sort of biggest self-judge and the biggest sort of self-torturer. But yeah, I feel we can learn to be compassionate with ourselves, and then also be compassionate with others. Whatever we do, however we treat ourselves is how we then treat others. So if we're constantly like, oh yeah, Soma, you should be, you're whatever, should be like this and like this and like this, and have this whole job description, then of course, then you meet anyone else afterwards, and you're going to have that same attitude, and it's not compassionate at all. So I feel like it's very well connected again with leading by example, and leading by example, not pretending to be awakened, but rather being compassionate with one another, being gentle with one another, which includes ourselves.
Thank you, Ayya. And for the record, this is not a disaster. This was an excellent talk, and I've just received some further messages. The talk is very grounding and authentic, Ayya. We loved your talk. Please keep on keeping it real. But what you've just touched on is such an important topic, and so many of us, I think, will relate to this, about how we just need to let go of that need to be perfect all the time and live up to this image that we have in our heads about ourselves and we want everyone to have of us. And just letting that go, even loosening it up a little bit, does give us that break that we so need, and so important in terms of our attachment to ourselves in the practice as well. So thank you so much for your words. We probably have some more time for questions. So if anyone has questions in the box, please put it in there today. And we also have a question here. Okay, so ChatGPT, AI, etc., can be scary and makes us feel vulnerable. Where is the world going? How do we cope with having our minds read? We are left bare for the world to see. So, Ayya, any comments about this? Being cyberspace bodhisattvas that we can be?
So, well, we have actually some electronic guidelines here at the monastery, so we don't use electronics that much, which is why I have no idea what ChatGPT is. I have heard of AI, which is artificial intelligence. But I do feel that in this kind of case, sometimes a little bit of ignorance is actually bliss, in the way that we are constantly reading these news, and they are, as Our monastic friend Bhante Sumita here calls them heartbreaking news. You open the New York Times, heartbreaking news. You open the Guardian, heartbreaking news. Like, it's always heartbreaking news. And of course, there's lots of disasters with technology, and probably this chat GPT sounds also like quite a horrible name. So it's probably also horrible, I assume, with the implications that it has. And I would keep it simple. Is there something that we can actually do about the subject matter? Do we work in technology? Do we have a sphere of influence? If we can do something about it, then let's do something about it. If not, try to be as Luddite as possible and protect your own mind. Once again, getting back to those kids beforehand, I find they're extremely interesting. The kids, that are here in New York that are kind of refusing everything that is technology, as well as all these interesting kids that are coming to the monastery as well, in the way that they're actually being quite radical. And that radical way of practicing, I think, is inspiring to many. So that's also what is going against the stream. We can't really do much about the stream. The stream is the stream. So if we can do something, then we do something. If we cannot do something, instead of getting, sort of desperation, once again, let's inspire others in a way with our actions, with our minds, with our thoughts. And so if we can actually protect our minds from all this chat GPT and whatever, and also reading too much about these things, that is also a big, great source of inspiration for others, because we're actually embodying an alternative lifestyle. We just had a bunch of teenagers from a university close by come interact with the monastic sangha, and they were mind blown by the fact that there could be such an alternative way to live. And they were so happy to see that there was such an alternative way to live. That is, in fact, the fourth messenger. That's exactly what it is. So we can all be the fourth messenger, even as lay people. You can actually be the fourth messenger. Either you become ordained or you embody the teachings of the Buddha. Actually practicing really as a Buddhist, I feel, is an embodiment of that fourth messenger, that there is actually an alternative. And if we always look for kind of clever ways to somewhat like fix the situation in a sort of worldly sense, I think most of us will be very frustrated because there's very little that we can do. Not even governments these days can actually do much about the horrible problems. We live in a very complicated world, very intricate. It's a big thicket. So yeah, I don't want to be all doom and gloom, but I do feel that actually doing something that is completely against the stream, which is practicing the teachings of the Buddha, is really where it's at. Practicing the Noble Eightfold Path is extremely radical. Once again, that's what really amazed those kids the other day. It was not some really clever sort of speech on, these are, use this kind of like program to do this and to do this, that, but rather like an alternative lifestyle, an alternative way of living.
Great example. Thank you so much, Ayya. So we come now to the end of the session, but I just want to echo some of the comments that are made online as well. So some people have said, thank you, Venerable Soma. Enjoyed your expression of to give is like it is the beautiful jewelry of the mind. Someone else has also said, Ayya Soma has always been authentic every time I've been with her. And I have to say, I echo that as well. Thank you so much for this very authentic, real, heartfelt talk and your presence here today. So thank you, Ayya. And I'm now going to hand over to Sin.
Thank you, Tina, and thank you, Ayya Soma, again. I echoed everything that Tina said. So thank you once again.